Korea fires more missiles overnight in an apparent protest against a U.S. nuclear-powered submarine entering the South. Nuclear negotiators of South Korea, the U.S. and Japan were quick to respond as they are keeping close tabs on this coming Thursday, what's known as Victory Day in the North. Korea's economy expanded 0.6% in the second quarter as imports fell greater than exports, but the central bank rejects worries over a recession. South Korea's constitutional court unanimously dismisses the impeachment motion of the nation's interior minister over last year's Itaewon crowd crush, saying his conduct was not grounds for impeachment. Political repercussions continue. It's July 25th, 2023. This is News Center. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Yoon Jung-min. North Korea apparently responded to the recent arrival of a U.S. nuclear-powered submarine in South Korea, again with ballistic missiles, this time at around midnight. This has prompted a strong response from South Korea, the United States, and Japan, as they are keeping close tabs on the regime's so-called Victory Day this week. Our Defense Ministry correspondent Bae Eun-ji begins our coverage.
At about midnight, North Korea fired 2 short-range ballistic missiles into the sea off its east coast. South Korea's Joint Chiefs of Staff said Tuesday that it detected that they were launched from areas near Pyongyang. One was fired 5 minutes before midnight, then another at midnight on Tuesday. They flew around 400 kilometers before falling into waters off the east coast. This appears to be a protest against the deployment of a U.S. nuclear-powered submarine, the USS Annapolis, that arrived at a naval base on South Korea's southern island of Jeju on Monday.
Intelligence authorities of South Korea and the U.S. are analyzing further details about the launch. Recently, the regime has been engaging in provocations late at night or in the early hours of the morning, so the authorities are analyzing North Korea's intentions behind that as well.
The 6,000-ton USS Annapolis is not nuclear-armed, as it's equipped with conventional weapons, but it is one of the main U.S. nuclear-powered submarines in terms of scale.
This shows the North's intention to respond militarily to Seoul's strategic assets. It could also be interpreted as Pyongyang's willingness to lead the tensions on the Korean peninsula.
Also, the launch may have been carried out to strengthen solidarity for the upcoming Victory Day in North Korea, which celebrates the 7 years of the Korean War's armistice. Meanwhile, top nuclear envoys of South Korea, the U.S., and Japan held phone talks on Tuesday morning and strongly condemned the launch. The Foreign Ministry says the 3 sides agreed to firmly respond to all kinds of missile launches from the North based on trilateral security cooperation. They also discussed the issue of the Chinese delegation's upcoming visit to North Korea to take part in the regime's Victory Day celebrations, scheduled for this week. Bae Eun-ji, Arirang News.
North Korea is poised to host its first foreign delegation in years since the coronavirus outbreak. And not just a Chinese delegation, but also a Russian one has been invited for the regime's so-called Victory Day this week, as Pyongyang seemingly bolsters ties with Beijing and Moscow on this occasion. Moon Hye-ryun has more.
After 3 years and 6 months, North Korea is set to receive its first foreign delegation. It has invited Chinese and Russian delegations to mark the 70th anniversary of the armistice of the Korean War on Thursday, known as Victory Day by the regime. According to the North Korean Central News Agency on Monday, the invited Chinese delegation is led by Lee Hong-sung, a member of the Political Bureau of the Central Committee of the Chinese Communist Party. The invitation extended to Russia's Minister of Defense, Sergei Shoigu, was announced the following day. This visit will mark the very first official visit by foreign guests in a shift in policy. Since the COVID-19 outbreak in 2020, North Korea has closed its borders, only partially resuming cargo transportation with China last year. The only known case of a foreign guest visiting the regime was back in March, when China's new ambassador to North Korea, Wang Yajun, took up the post. North Korea has also been taking part in international events, with ambassador-level representatives already overseas. This includes the ASEAN Regional Forum for the past 3 years, with this year's forum also attended by its ambassador to Indonesia, An Kwang-il, instead of its foreign minister, Choi Sun-hee. The invited Chinese delegations took part in a memorial ceremony for those who fought in the war on Tuesday, according to a Chinese newspaper. The delegations visiting the country this Thursday are expected to attend the celebratory military parade and meet with its leader, Kim Jong-un. Observers largely see the North's first post-pandemic foreign guest coming from China and Russia as a apparent show of their ties against South Korea, the US, and Japan. But eyes are on whether North Korea could resume other exchanges with China, perhaps in flights and trains, or keep it at high-level diplomacy for the time being. 문혜련, Arirang News.
Marking the 70th anniversary of the Korean Armistice Agreement, the remains of 7 Korean soldiers who died in the Korean War are returning home from the United States. According to the Defense Ministry on Tuesday, a repatriation ceremony attended by Vice Defense Minister Shin Bum-chul and Admiral John Aquilino, the commander of the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, will take place on Wednesday morning in Hawaii. The Korean military's KC-330 aircraft will then carry the remains and arrive at the Seoul Air Base in the evening. Following a welcoming ceremony, they will be sent to the Defense Ministry to undergo DNA testing for identification. The remains were sent to the U.S. after Pyongyang in 1990 resumed repatriating fallen soldiers who fought in the war, but that stopped in 1954. 3 foreign veterans from the U.S., Britain, and Canada who fought in the Korean War are visiting this country again more than 70 years after the conflict. Our Kim Jong-sil has their story, who have so much to share about their witnessing of Korea then and now.
Korean War veterans Edward Buckner, William Ward, and Colin Thackeray are visiting the country whose independence they fought for so many years ago. They were invited here by South Korea's Ministry of Patriots and Veterans Affairs to mark the 70th anniversary of the armistice that ended the conflict. All are from different countries and have backgrounds, but the veterans share one thing in common. They fought for Korea, a foreign land. Having witnessed the tragedy of the war, the veterans expressed their impressions of Korean people during that time.
You had, just like I've always said, you had to be there to see it. But the Korean people deserve a hell of a lot because they were the heroes. They really were. To live this thing out, and it was just something else.
Yeah. Veteran William Ward added that he's proud of having fought for Korea and that he'll do it all over again. They took the moment to look for someone too. Canadian veteran Edward Buckner said he's looking for a Korean boy who used to clean his military tent during the war.
Do you remember his name?
Yes. I forget it. Cho Chok Song. I've had that picture all along.
The Canadian veteran also showed strong emotion when thinking back on the war.
I am so grateful that you took what you got and made it what you have. It's a beautiful country.
British-Korean War veteran Colin Thackeray expressed his impressions on being back in Seoul.
Coming to Seoul for the first time, and I was amazed because last time we saw it was flat.
Yeah.
Now there's just hundreds and hundreds of towers of apartment blocks, and I congratulate the Korean people on the success and the prosperity that they should now show.
War veteran and also something of a singer, Colin expressed his feelings about being asked to sing a Korean traditional folk song, Arirang, at a Korean War Armistice event to be held in Busan.
Arirang brings a lot of memories because I don't think many servicemen that served in Korea at that time don't know that song because it's very familiar to everybody. And when I was asked to sing it at the banquet tomorrow, I was very delighted.
The 3 veterans from different countries seem to have found a reason why they fought for Korea. Kim Jong-sil, Arirang News.
Korea's economy slightly expanded in the second quarter as imports fell greater than exports. Lee Soo-jun explains.
South Korea's economy has grown for the second consecutive quarter. Data from the Bank of Korea released on Tuesday shows that the country's gross domestic product adjusted for inflation rose 0.6% on quarter during the April to June period of this year. The nation narrowly avoided falling into recession, typically defined as 2 consecutive quarters of economic contraction, in the first quarter by achieving a growth rate of 0.3%. This is the second straight quarter that the country has seen economic growth. The central bank attributed the on-quarter growth to the rise in net exports. Net exports rose in the second quarter as total imports fell more sharply compared to total exports. Imports dropped 4.2% compared to exports falling 1.8%.
The growth was led by the increase in net exports from the larger decline in imports. Imports fell sharply, mostly due to decreased imports of natural gas and oil.
Private consumption, however, fell 0.1% compared to the previous quarter, mainly due to the decrease in spending on food and accommodation. Government expenditure dropped nearly 2% on the back of decreased spending on Social Security benefits. Investment in construction and facilities also each tumbled 0.3% and 0.2% amid the sluggish demand for transportation equipment.
In-person activities fell partly due to poor weather conditions, but these are temporary factors.
Meanwhile, South Korea's gross national income, the total amount of money earned by people and businesses, remained unchanged from the previous quarter, despite the rise in real GDP as trade conditions remain sluggish. The Bank of Korea said that if the nation's economy grows 0.7% on quarter during both the third and fourth quarters, it will be able to meet this year's economic growth outlook of 1.4%. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
Oil prices have jumped to a 3-month high following production cuts and rising expectations of a Chinese economic rebound. The U.S. benchmark West Texas Intermediate crude rose 2.2% on Monday to $78.86 per barrel, while the international benchmark Brent crude also jumped by the same amount to $82.74. Both prices have been surging for 4 weeks, with supplies expected to fall due to cuts by OPEC and OPEC+. China's oil demand is expected to grow after Beijing vowed to step up policy support for its economic recovery, with the main focus being on boosting domestic demand. The Constitutional Court of Korea has unanimously rejected an attempt by the opposition-controlled National Assembly to impeach Interior Minister Lee Sang-min over the Itaewon tragedy last year. It said his conduct was not enough grounds for impeachment. Our political correspondent Lee Si-hoo reports.
South Korea's Constitutional Court on Tuesday unanimously rejected the opposition-controlled National Assembly's impeachment motion against Interior Minister Lee Sang-min, allowing him to return to duty 167 days after he was suspended. In its ruling, the 9-justice court headed by Justice Lee Jong-seok noted that, quote, although Lee did not make the best decisions in disaster response as the Interior Minister, it is difficult to say that he significantly breached his obligations as laid out by the Constitution, such as the Framework Act on the Management of Disasters and Safety and the State Public Officials Act. The court also said the tragedy in Itaewon was not down to one specific cause or person, but due to the lack of clear manuals on safety management of events without an organizer, and due to a lack of comprehensive response capabilities in dealing with large-scale disasters. This is the first impeachment ruling on a minister since the beginning of South Korea's constitutional government. It comes 269 days after the deadly crowd crush in Itaewon late last year, which killed 159 people, and nearly 6 months after the vote to impeach Lee.
Back in February, the opposition-controlled National Assembly voted to impeach Minister Lee, holding him responsible for government failures in planning and responses that likely contributed to the large number of casualties.
Prior to the ruling, the court held 4 public hearings participated in by Minister Lee, the Assembly, officials from the Interior Ministry, the National Police Agency, and the National Fire Agency, as well as bereaved family members of those killed in the tragedy. For an impeachment to be endorsed, at least 6 out of 9 justices have to vote in favor. A leading constitutional scholar explained that although there is no doubt that the unfortunate tragedy claimed many victims, that doesn't directly translate to legal responsibility.
Moral responsibility is not one of the criteria for impeachment judgments in South Korea. The Constitutional Court saw that in purely legal terms, the minister was not legally responsible.
Meanwhile, after the court's decision, an official from the presidential office said that the majority opposition in the assembly abused its impeachment right and will be judged by the public for such, quote, unconstitutional behavior. 이시후, Arirang News.
Over in Israel, people have taken to the streets to protest the passing of a government-led controversial bill that limits the Supreme Court's power to veto government decisions. Ian Jin explains.
The Israeli government on Monday passed the controversial bill that's triggered some of the biggest protests in the country's history. By the evening of the same day, protests against the bill had spread nationwide as thousands of people blocked roads and clashed with police in Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, and other parts of the country. The so-called reasonableness bill prevents Israel's Supreme Court from overruling government decisions that it considers senseless. It was approved by 64 votes to 0 after the opposition boycotted the final vote. The passing of this law is the first of a broader set of judicial reforms which the government has set out to correct what it describes as a power imbalance. Demonstrations on the streets of Israel have been taking place weekly since the start of the year in an effort to protect what protesters say is an attack on democracy. And at the end of last week, leading up to the parliamentary voting, tens of thousands of protesters marched some 70 kilometers from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem and set up camp in a park between the Knesset, which is Israel's parliament, and the Supreme Court. On Monday morning, protesters blocking a boulevard outside the Knesset were sprayed by a water cannon and pulled off the road by police against a backdrop of drums, whistles, and air horns. Injuries and arrests have been reported. Meanwhile, the government says the series of planned reforms serve to strengthen democracy in the country and that the reasonableness bill was necessary because the Supreme Court had accrued too much power over politics in recent decades. The controversial reforms have polarized Israel, triggering one of the most serious domestic crises in the country's history. Former heads of Israel's security services, chief justices, and prominent legal and business figures have also been vocal against the government's reforms. Yoon-jin, Arirang News.
On the K-pop front, BTS member Jungkook's solo single 7 has hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. The feat makes him the second Korean soloist to stand at the top of this chart after bandmate Jimin made headlines 3 months ago. Lee Seung-jae has more.
Less than 2 weeks since the release of his first official solo single, BTS's Jungkook saw himself and his song 7 at the top of the Billboard Hot 100 singles chart on Monday. According to the Billboard chart released Monday, 7 has sold 153,000 song downloads and CD singles combined, while drawing 21.9 million streams and 6.4 million radio airplay audience impressions. The Billboard Hot 100 chart adds the most popular songs of the week in the U.S. across all genres, including streaming, radio airplay, and sales data. Interestingly, yet not surprisingly, Jungkook becomes just the second South Korean solo artist since his fellow group member Jimin topped the chart in April with his single Like Crazy. As a group, BTS and their songs Dynamite, a remix of Savage Love, Life Goes On, Butter, Permission to Dance, and My Universe all topped the Billboard Hot 100 charts, making the K-pop stars a regular at the top of the list. Jungkook is also the 6th member of the 7-piece group to have debuted as a solo artist. 7 is a pop song featuring American female rapper Latto and entered the British official singles chart at #3. After its official release on July 14th, it also debuted at #1 on the iTunes charts in 106 countries, as well as Spotify's daily top song global chart. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
The monsoon season in the country is coming to an end, with the total amount of rainfall recorded almost reaching an average of 650 millimeters nationwide. Data from the Korea Meteorological Agency on Tuesday showed that this amount was the third highest in 50 years. The year with the highest rainfall was 2006, with over 700 millimeters. This year, starting from June 25th, the nationwide average number of rainy days during the monsoon season has been 20.5, ranking 15th since 1973. Officials said the higher precipitation ranking compared to the number of rainy days means that each day was accompanied by torrential rainfall. Particularly noteworthy are the southern regions of the country, which recorded a record-breaking average precipitation of over 690 millimeters. A number of cafes here in Korea are doing more than just brewing coffee. They are empowering people with disabilities to better serve their communities. Our Chung Eun-ju tells us how.
Junho Jang, a 22-year-old with a developmental disability, is a barista at the Namjong Post Office Cafe in Incheon. The cafe brand he works for was created by the Korea Disabled People's Development Institute. The first branch opened in 2016 in Sejong, and the number has since increased to 88 over the past 7 years. The cafes are opened in surplus spaces at public institutions and private companies, which are provided free of charge, and more than 70% of employees have some type of developmental disorder. This program is different from other welfare projects for the disabled, as it actively pursues sustainable profit-making. Market analysis is conducted before opening the cafe, and the staff is educated in the management of coffee beans. Thanks to this program, about 250 people with a developmental disability have become independent with stable employment.
We plan to continue improving sales through market analysis and customer satisfaction surveys.
Korea Post joined the project at the end of last year and provided space in 4 locations, including Incheon and Daegu. Thanks to this, the cafe brand was able to prepare for further expansion nationwide.
I think the most positive part of creating jobs for people with disabilities is using our infrastructure.
The employment rate for people over the age of 15 with a developmental disability is only 20%. This is lower than the rate for all persons with disabilities, which is 35%. The ultimate goal of the cafe is to provide quality jobs for people with developmental disorders and help them develop the social skills to become independent.
I've been able to get along with new people, and it is satisfying because I've been doing long-term work, so it's rewarding.
People with developmental disabilities are able to bolster their pride as professional baristas working in the cafes. Chung Eun-ju, Arirang News.
We'll have some lingering monsoonal showers remaining tomorrow. Central regions, parts of Chungcheongdo and Gyeongsangnam-do provinces will see up to 80 millimeters. The capital region, Jeollado and Gyeongsangbuk-do provinces, as well as Jeju Island, can expect up to 60 millimeters. The rain system will keep dropping showers until tomorrow morning. Despite the rain, conditions will only get hotter from this point on. Tomorrow, maximum temperatures in Seoul will get up to 30 degrees Celsius. Sweltering conditions will lead to unstable air, which will produce on and off showers for many inland regions. In the meantime, a large part of South Korea is under heat wave alerts. This means that sensible temperatures have exceeded 33 degrees. Chances are high that they will stay in place for tomorrow as well. Morning temperatures in Seoul and Gwangju will start off at 25 degrees. Aside from Busan, the entire nation will be under rainy spells. Seoul will get up to 30, Daejeon and Gwangju 31, Gyeongju will be topping out at 34 degrees. The Seoul metropolitan area will see frequent showers for the remainder of the work week. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is News Center for tonight. Thanks for watching. A panel session coming up.
Welcome. 엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 하나, 둘, 셋.
Hey, Mr. Cupid, make sure you listen to what I say. I may be stupid or quite naive.
끝없이 쏟아지는 포토스팟. 휴대폰 한 대로 감당할 수 있겠니? 한국에 오면 먹어야죠. 먹어도 끝이 없는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
Ireland, like Korea, is a very outward-facing country. Our peoples are curious about the world. Like Irish people, it matters to Koreans that your story is told well, that people understand your values, your culture, your perspectives. Arirang plays a really important role in telling Korea's story to the world and to promoting the Korean brand. This fosters closer friendships between Korea and other countries and enables better cooperation. Resonating with the world, Arirang.
한국에 오면 먹어야죠. 먹어도 끝이 없는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니? 웰컴. 엄청난 에너지를 춤으로 뿜어내는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
Hello everyone, it's Tuesday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. The 2023 FIFA Women's World Cup in Australia and New Zealand kicked off on July 20th. A total of 32 of the top national teams, divided into 8 groups, are competing for the trophy. South Korea is in Group H and had its first match this morning. Though they lost 2-0 to Colombia, more games are to come this Sunday and next Thursday. Meanwhile, more and more of Korea's male stars are joining big football clubs overseas, such as Lee Gang-in in Paris Saint-Germain and Kim Min-jae with Bayern Munich. What's behind this recognition of Korean players and what can we expect from them? To talk about this, we invite Paul Neat, Arirang's very own sports editor. Paul, welcome.
Thank you.
All right, and we also have football writer Steve Han. Steve, hi, thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me again. How's it going?
All right, thank you for being with us. Now, first question to our Paul. So, the 9th Women's World Cup kicked off last Thursday, and the tournament has been expanded from 24 to 32 countries. Now, what are other unique features of this 9th edition?
Well, yeah, like you said, it is 32 teams now. That makes it the biggest Women's World Cup ever. And it's different because it has co-hosts. It's 2 countries are hosting it, so 2 federations, New Zealand and, of course, Australia. It's the first to be held in the Southern Hemisphere as well, which should, in theory, give the hosts an advantage. But in terms of the history of how many teams played in the World Cup in the past. The first in 1991 only had 12 teams, and then 16 in 99, and then in 2015 it became 24. That means obviously with more teams there are new teams, 8 new teams in total. Haiti, Ireland are in there as well, Morocco, Panama, the Philippines, Portugal, Vietnam and Zambia. Philippines actually won their game earlier this evening. So they were the first team of this new batch of teams to record a win in this current World Cup. In terms of lasts, there are some lasts maybe. There are some legends of the game who will be retiring or ending their international careers after this World Cup. Megan Rapinoe, of course, of the USA, won the tournament 2 times. She said she will retire after this World Cup. And Marta of Brazil, one of the best of all time. She had an ACL injury before the tournament, managed to get fit just in time. She's played in 6, but she's never won the tournament so far. So she's one to keep an eye on. And Alex Morgan, again, of the USA, and Eugenie Le Sommer of France. So those are the players who might be saying farewell to their careers, or certainly for their national teams. And also, in terms of new things, there's more money. There's going to be more money divided up and paid out to the players. So I think it's going to be $110 million US, which is 3 times more than the last World Cup in 2019 and 7 times more than in 2015.
Right, so many interesting features. Now, Steve, so Tuesday, as far as I know, marks the last day of the World Cup's opening group games. What has been the highlight of the tournament so far?
I guess if I had to pick one game, I'll pick the Spain versus Costa Rica game, which Spain won 3-0. Not so much because it was a dramatic game, but it's actually because this game showed just how much improvement women's football has made from a qualitative standpoint in the last 4 to 8 years. It's worth remembering that 8 years ago, in 2015, Spain were victims of Korea's first ever win at a Women's World Cup. Korea beat Spain to advance to the last 16 in that tournament. But over the last 8 years since then, Spain has won the under-17 Women's World Cup. They've won the under-20 Women's World Cup. And their strongest club side, FC Barcelona, their women's side, have won the Women's Champions League 2 of the last 3 seasons. I think that just goes to show you how rapidly women's football has improved across the world over the last 8 years or so. So for us Koreans, we've got some catch up to do.
All right, I see. Now, Paul, so this morning, South Korea played against Colombia, and unfortunately, they were beaten by 2-0. Now, what was your takeaway from the match?
Yeah, well, the jinx continues because Korea were looking to record their first group stage opener, win in a group stage opener. Obviously, that hasn't happened. They were doing all right, I think, until the first goal. It was unlucky for Shim So-yeon with the handball for the penalty. A hand wasn't in an unnatural position, as they would say, but the rules are these days, if the ball does hit your hand in the box, it is a penalty. Good pen, keeper was sent the wrong way. One standout for me before the game was the starting 11, because the usual keeper, Kim Jong-mi, she was dropped and Yoon Young-gul played in goal instead. Now, Kim Jong-mi made some errors in the Asian Cup final last year that led to a comeback loss, really, if you will, from Korea winning 2-0, then lost 3-2 to China. So the manager, Colin Bell, clearly not sort of impressed or has lost a bit of faith in her. But then Yoon Young-gul made a mistake for the second goal, so it's all very, very unfortunate. So the result, obviously, is not the way they wanted to start this World Cup, but they will feel a little bit unlucky that there's some, because they did start quite brightly. They had, I think, up until the first goal, 3 shots, 2 on target. So they were doing all right, and they were finding a rhythm. The penalty, that was a bit of a turning point. Now it's all about looking to Morocco. That if they can, luckily that game is next, not Germany, right? So if they can sort of get a win against Morocco, who are ranked 72nd in the world, then they've definitely got a chance. One bright spot though was Casey Fair for Korea. So she came on, and at 16 is the youngest player to feature in a Women's World Cup. So she came on for the last sort of 13 minutes, so hopefully we'll see more of her against Morocco.
Right, I see. Now, Steve, I'd like to ask you more on the upcoming schedule. So South Korea's other Group H opponents are, as we have already said, Morocco and Germany. And having been beaten in their World Cup opener, a result in their match with Morocco on July 30th is really vital. They then play Germany on August 3rd. Now, how do you expect these matches to go, and which players will South Korea need to be wary of?
Yeah, no, I think number one thing for Korea, they have their pride riding on the line over these next 2 games. And one thing that these 23 players who are at the World Cup, one thing that they have said almost in unison, going into this World Cup was, we're responsible for women's football not being as popular in Korea. We feel responsible for that because as national team players, we simply haven't done well enough. And we have to do what we can to help more young girls play football in our country. These are their words. So they're going to have to follow up on this. And, for players like Chi So-yeon, Cho So-yeon, and Kim Hee-ri, this is likely going to be their last World Cup. So this is not how they want to go out. And it's one thing to lose, but to look lethargic and defeated in a World Cup game like they did in today's game, it's quite devastating, honestly. So if they're really passionate about playing for young girls in Korea, now is clearly not the time to give up because you still got 2 more games to go. Right, and much improvements is very needed right now. Now, Steve, one more question. So this is South Korea's 4th appearance at the Women's World Cup, and they've reached the round of 16 once before in 2015 in Canada, as far as I know. Now, how have the Taeguk ladies done in previous tournaments? Let me preface what I'm about to say by stressing that I've got nothing but respect for these players, but I'll put it this way. The notion within people in women's football in our country is that Korean women's football has improved, and I agree with that. That's completely true. But, so give all the credit to our players, give all the credit to Colin Bell, give all the credit to the WK League, but here's my analogy on this. 8 years ago, like I said, Korea beat Spain in the Women's World Cup. And we're saying that Korea has improved since then, which is true. But guess what? Spain, who lost to Korea on that day, improved faster and they improved more. And it's the same with England, France, Canada, Australia. So improving in sports, oftentimes it's not just about how much we have improved, because it's also about how much we've improved in comparison to the rest of the competition. And I think that's where Korea is falling short right now.
Right, I see. What you have just said, I think, is something that we need to really think about. Now, Paul, so I'd like to also tap on other teams as well. The U.S. is seeking a third consecutive World Cup titles, and the Team USA will, could they make history as the first team ever, male or female, to win 3 World Cups in a row? And which teams could potentially upset this Team USA's goal?
Yeah, well, first of all, the USA, they've been so dominant over the years that they just have to be considered to be the favourites, and their odds only shortened as well after that win over Vietnam. But they're used to the big occasion. You know, they've done this before. There's a lot of these players that are still in this squad from the last squad and the World Cup before that. So they know when they get late into this tournament, they know what it takes to get over the line in sort of tight games and tense sort of atmospheres. And like Steve just said earlier about the sort of Cho Soi-han and Ji Se-yeon in the Korea team, similar for the USA as well. Megan Rapinoe and Alex Morgan, they're going to want to go out having won another World Cup and, like you just said, set that record of 3 in a row. But there are probably a handful of other teams that could genuinely be contenders for this World Cup. Germany is one of them. Obviously, they're ranked number 2 in the world. They put 6 past Morocco yesterday. So that's obviously a statement of intent from them. France, too, they have Hervé Renard as their manager. Now, he was at the Men's World Cup just last year. He did a great job with Saudi Arabia. He obviously beat Argentina and got to the round of 16. He's very clear, very organised. I think that will help this France team. England, too, of course. When you look at a team that has won the Euros beforehand, they have to be considered to be among the contenders. They were unconvincing in their 1-0 win over Haiti in their first game, and their pre-tournament form wasn't the best. But still, they have experience of going late into tournaments and ultimately getting over the line. And of course, Australia, but they're missing Sam Kerr, who is missed their first game and maybe will miss their second game as well through injury. If they can get her back fit and in the team, then they have a good chance of going on and winning on home soil.
All right, I see. Now, Steve, I believe this will be last question on Women's World Cup. So Australia, the co-host of the Women's World Cup, along with New Zealand, has been critical in terms of the gender disparity in World Cup prize money and the fact that some nations do not even have collective bargaining rights. Now, what are the details of this issue and what conditions need to improve for female footballers?
Yeah, I think this might be a little bit off topic, but when it comes to this specific conversation, what I find a little, I think disturbing is not the right word. I think uncomfortable is more like it. It's that for Korea specifically, we're not even ready to have this discussion, to be honest with you. And what I mean by that is 10 years ago, Korea had close to 2,000 registered female footballers across the country. And we now have about half of that, a little more than half of that. So this is a cultural failure, in my opinion. Forget about the game today, losing to Colombia. A day before the game, I wrote a preview that was read by 250,000 people on Naver, Korea's biggest sports portal, news portal. Well, more than half of the reader comments on that story, it was literally blatant hatred towards our own players, and for absolutely no reason. And this was before losing today. So as weird as this may sound, the fact that countries like Australia and the US are even having conversations about gender inequality and equal pay in sports across all genders, that alone puts them ahead of Korea. Because for female Korean athletes, they haven't even started their fight against inequality because what they're still dealing with is pretty much, institutionalized stigma. And that's something we got to think about because a lot of the rest of the world is fighting against gender inequality in sports. But we're not even ready to start that fight yet, to be honest with you.
Right, I see your point, and I cannot agree more that we should think about the improvements that we can make for the women's football team. All right, now, Paul, moving on to the men's soccer. Recently, versatile midfielder Lee Gang-in brought his talents to Paris Saint-Germain, while defender Kim Min-jae joined the team German football giants Bayern Munich. Now, how surprising was it to see such big-name football clubs to sign these Korean players, and what do you expect from these players at their new clubs?
Well, I wouldn't say surprised because those two in particular are very talented. It's been very clear for a number of years that they are they were supposed to be destined for the very top. I think in the case of Lee Kang-in, it's more of a pleasant surprise that he signed for Paris Saint-Germain, because there were a number of teams linked to him, even sort of in Spain where he'd played before, even in England as well with Aston Villa. But Paris Saint-Germain, you know, that's the team that he chose, and he's got a genuine chance of winning the league most years. But for Paris Saint-Germain, their project with their owners is to win the Champions League. And obviously they brought in players like Mbappe and Neymar and Messi just until last year. And the aim was to win the Champions League. Now they're trying to go in a different way. They're bringing in some more younger players and try and build it that way. But in terms of what we can expect from him, he's now got the stage to show just how good that he is. It'd be a different kind of expectation than what he's had before in Spain, especially with Real Mallorca, not the biggest club. Valencia were obviously a very, very big club, but they weren't quite reaching the same heights that they used to 10, 15 years ago. But now it's time for him to sort of really show what he's capable of. As for Kim Min-jae, well, even in 2017, when he broke into the Jungkook first team at the age of 20 or 21, it was very clear just how good he was. He was linked to a move to the Premier League in, well, about 3 or 4 years ago, before he went to Beijing. Some were kind of worried that that might have sent him on the wrong course towards Europe. Luckily for him, it worked out quite well. He went to Fenerbahce in Turkey. And then once he had that really great first season with Fenerbahce, we realised, yeah, he is the real deal. He got that big move to Napoli. And it was such a surprise, I think, with what happened at Napoli, because it was their first league title in Italy for nearly 30 years, or just over 30 years. And they won it so convincingly. And Kim Min-jae was a huge part of that. So he had lots of choice, I think, or he could have probably picked any team in Europe that he wanted to go to. Manchester United were supposed to be interested, but I think they had budget issues. They had to buy a new goalkeeper and a new striker and a midfield player, so they probably weren't ready to sort of plump for Kim Min-jae. But in Germany, he'll have a chance to win the Champions League. They won it only a few years ago, Bayern Munich, whereas PSG haven't ever won it, but Bayern Munich have, and he'll probably win the Bundesliga most years. It's really great to see that these two players have different paths to where they've ultimately ended up, the sort of very top of European football, but it's nice to see they've both gone to really, really big clubs and can win some silverware as well.
Right, so talented players indeed, and a lot to expect. Now, Paul, but they're not the only ones who signed with big-named football clubs, right? A Scottish club, Celtic, has also signed Yang Hyun-jun and Kwon Hyuk-kyu, who follows the Oh Hyung-kyu's footsteps after his transfer to the Scottish club back in January. Now, could you tell us more about the Scottish league and what role of the Korean players do you expect them to play?
Yeah, well, in terms of Celtic, they have a bit of history with Korean players because Ki Sung-young and Cha Jae-ri were both there in, I think it was 2010, 2012, and they won the league title there and a few other trophies as well. Very, very big club, one of the 2 biggest clubs in Scotland. In terms of league titles, they've won more than their crosstown rivals, Glasgow Rangers. But their previous manager, Ange Postecoglou, he is now at Spurs, but he has, because of his time in Australia and in Japan, he had this really good knowledge of signing players from Asia, in Japan and Korea. Because obviously teams like Celtic, where they will have to look at trying to find good young players, but for bargain prices, they've obviously targeted Japan and South Korea. Even though he's left the club, they obviously still have identified this as being a really good model to follow in terms of the transfer sort of tactics and stuff like that. But obviously, Oh Hyung-kyu went there in January. He's been a bit part player, more of an impact sub-role, but he's made an impact. He's scored goals. And I think because of the success that he's had in Scotland with Celtic, it's opened the door then for Yang Hyun-jun and Kwon Hyuk-kyu. Yang Hyun-jun is a bit more experienced. He has been playing for Gangwon's first team in K-League 1 for the last 18 months. Kind of rose to stardom after the All-Star game last year. He embarrassed a few Tottenham players in his performances. And really, he's a very exciting young player, and I think going to Celtic is a really good stepping stone into Europe. If you can play at a big club like that with big expectations, different from what they will have experienced before, they're playing in the Champions League as well.
Right.
Because they won the Scottish League title. That puts them straight into the group stage of the Champions League. So everything's there for these players to sort of learn and maybe put themselves in the shop window for a move to the Premier League. That happened with Key. Obviously, he went to Swansea after his time at Celtic. So, good first step into Europe. And I think even Jungkook said that in an interview this week. Perhaps shouldn't have said that, really, that he sees Celtic as like a stepping stone, but he's kind of right. And, yeah, we'll see how they both do.
All right, I see. Now, Steve, it seems more and more Korean players are getting opportunities at big clubs abroad. Now, could you tell us the reasons behind the recent recognition of Korean football players?
Well, I think it's important to kind of ask ourselves, is this a trend or a select few cases of exception? Because we look at a player like Lee Gang-in. You know, he's a player who lived in Spain since he was 10 years old. And we look at a player like Kim Min-jae, who grew up in Korea, but he took this unorthodox route of playing through the university and then, you know, making his senior debut in a third division of Korean football pyramid before his career just started to take off. And, you know, these two players have simply been exceptions to the trend. And they really got to where they are today by bucking the system, to be honest. And you go back and look at a player like Park Ji-sung. He made his professional debut in the second division of Japanese football. And you look at a player like Son Heung-min, you know, barely even played competitive football in Korea before he moved to Germany at age 15. You know, I think the question is, more and more Korean players joining big-name European clubs. You know, these are simply a result of individual players finding ways to buck the trend. You know, so give them all the credit in the world, but, you know, Korea as a footballing country, you know, we've done a lot. We've come very far, but there's still a lot more to do.
Right, I see still more things that we need to do. All right, now, Paul, I believe this will be our last question. So the draw for the group stages of the European Champions League is going to take place in August, and expectations are really high right now because we have Lee Gang-in and Kim Min-jae at big-name clubs in the competition. Now, so far as I know, former Manchester United player Park Ji-sung was the only Korean player to win the title, right? What are the chances of another Korean player to win this medal? Could you briefly tell us? Yeah,
well, I think the fact that both of those two players are at genuine contenders for the UCL title is that we have probably a better chance than ever before than a Korean player to go on and do what Park Ji-sung did. And, you know, at Bayern Munich, Thomas Tuchel is their coach. He's won the Champions League before. He's done it before. And Kim Min-jae's experience at Napoli will help him. Obviously, he had a very good season with Napoli, and he played in the Champions League as well. So that experience will definitely help him. Of course, it depends on the draw. Both of those two teams are seeded, so they're in pot 1, and they will get drawn against teams from pots 2, 3, and 4, so therefore supposedly weaker teams. So they will be probably the strongest teams in their group. It is luck of the draw, obviously, and we'll see what kind of a draw that they get. But, yeah, we definitely, I think, probably have the strongest chance that we've ever had of having a Korean player go on and do what Park Ji-sung did.
Good to hear that. Let's wait and see. All right, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Thank you, Paul. And thank you, Steve, for your insights and your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. All
right. Now, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.
I'm live!
저를 도와주시는 분들이
저희와 함께 해주시는 세션분들
아무리 봐도 없지 텐션 같은데 아니라고 아무도 안 하는 거고
좋아요.